For coming today. It's a great pleasure to introduce Moshe Vardi today, and it's even a greater pleasure to see how many people of you have actually come. I've been told that it's going to be a very accessible and not very technical talk today, so I'm sure you'll all enjoy it. Just for the sake of those that are not part of the research group, I did write a few things here. Moshe asked me not to read all of it, so I'll just read a few things. He's the Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Service Professor of Computational Engineering and Director of the Ken Kennedy Institute for Information Technology at Rice University. He chaired the computer science before, I believe between 1994 and 2002. And prior to joining Rice University in 1993, was at the IBM Almaden Research Center. His research interests include automated reasoning, which is a branch of AI, artificial intelligence, database systems, computational complexity theory, and recently I think he's working on the Boolean satisfiability problem, multi-agent systems, design specification, verification, and so on and so forth. Moshe actually received his PhD here at the Hebrew University in 1981. And he's the co-author and author of over 500 articles and 2 books, Reasoning About Knowledge and Finite Model Theory and Its Applications. Now, the funny thing is that he's the recipient of numerous awards, including the IBM Outstanding Innovation Award, the 2000 Gödel Prize, etc. So rather than listing all the awards that he did receive, I decided to list all of those that he has not received yet. I'm not going to mention them here. And he's also, importantly, the editor-in-chief of the communication of the ACM, and those of you in computer science probably know it very well. Moshe is going to talk to us today about humans, machines, and my interpretation, the future of humans rather than just of work. Thank you, Moshe.
Thank you very much for this introduction. This introduction looks good when you send them to funding agencies, but they're kind of embarrassing when you read them in public. It reminds me of a story about 3 MIT graduate students that submitted a paper, and one had a footnote next to his name, and it says AT&T fellow, he has a fellowship from AT&T. The other one has a footnote that says Hertz fellow, he has a fellowship from the Hertz Foundation. And the third one had a footnote, and it says a jolly good fellow. Now, most talks are... Most scientific talks are about spending a few minutes about raising some questions and explaining why they are important, and spending most of the time on giving answers by the speaker usually. This is mostly about raising questions. And I want to start with a context which is, this is part of the Ada Lovelace lecture series, and we celebrated very recently her 200th birthday, and it's a birthday. The reason we celebrate it because she wrote one paper. In fact, only signed it with her AAL, Ada Augusta Lovelace. And the important thing about the paper is the first paper that really started to think about the implications of computing. But the reason this paper has become significant, and Ada Lovelace has become significant, is because what happened in the 200 years since, and where we have built a discipline that today is clearly one of the most significant in shaping our life in a variety of ways. And what this talk is about, reflecting what it's going to do to us in the future. And for this, I'd like to go back to a letter that she wrote to Babbage in 1843. Essentially, she proposed that they launch a project, and he will be the CTO because he had good ideas, but she will be the CEO because she knows how to get things done, which he did not know how to get things done. But you also go into, why are we doing this? Why should we be doing this? And it's okay. Well, it's okay if you want to do it to become rich and famous. It's okay. But we should also do it. Add my might. I had to go to the Oxford English Dictionary. It's not this little insect that we think about. It's an old word for a small coin, a small payment. And she wanted to put this to the most effective use of mankind. And this is, I think, true, should be something we should always remember. We all want to get rich and famous, but hopefully what we do is also for the most effective use of mankind. And that's the question whether I want to raise today. And I started thinking, I'm a computer scientist, and I started thinking seriously about jobs in the context of the Great Recession of 2008. That when you look at its impact, this is US job losses from the beginning to the end, and you see that this recession, the reason economists call it the Great Recession, because it is the deepest job losses, and it was the longest by the time all these job losses have been recovered. Okay, it took, so you see, it took much longer than a typical recession. It's the deepest and longest post-World War II recessions. And the reality is that this is not over. If you look at a recession of this magnitude, the social implication will unfold over a whole generation. It will be 30 years. People will write about the adverse implication of such a deep recession. But I want to put it in even a deeper context. And the deeper context is what happens to the economy at large. And if you look at the period from early 50s for the next 30 years, there are about 4 indicators that seems to march together. And the thing that drive economic growth, and are there any economists here? I know at least one.
There are.
So a few economists, okay. So you can jump on me when I'm wrong. And the thing that drives the economic growth is labor productivity. We're becoming more productive. And when the economy grows, GDP grows. And what you see here also, the number of jobs, more jobs have been created, and income has grown. So growing productivity drives the whole thing, everybody benefits. The economy grows, everybody seems to benefit. And when you see this number go together, you see the fact that they march together must be some economic law. Look at this, 30 years, they all march together. And people call it the great coupling. But then what happens roughly over the past 30 years is become the great decoupling. That again, productivity continues to increase, and GDP continues to grow. And these are the 2 numbers at the top. They continue to grow. Of course, they zigzag, but they continue to grow. But number of jobs created has flattened, and median household income also has flattened. And so this now is this decoupling, and you can see it very clearly here. The growing gap between GDP per capita and the zigzag that you see there at the end, that's the recession. And this is the real median family income adjusted for inflation, and you see that it's completely not growing the same way as the economy has gone overall. And this led some people to say, normally there was a belief that in economics that rising tide lifts all boats. If the economy grows, this was also sometimes it was called the trickle-down theory. Everybody's going to benefit. And what we see here, the tide and the boats have parted company. The economy grows, but somehow this does not distribute itself evenly or very unevenly across the economy. So what's going on here? So there is now an ongoing debate. What is the cause of this? So on one hand, you have the people who are unabashedly neo-Luddites, and they blame technology. So if you remember, the Luddites are the people that, it's not clear why exactly they're called Luddites, that's historically questionable, but anyway, they were called Luddites, and they were unhappy with the technology of the Industrial Revolution that was throwing them out of jobs. This is in the fabric industry. And so the new Luddites are blaming technology. Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee from MIT, productivity growth and employment growth started to become decoupled from each other. We are creating jobs, but not enough of them. Jeffrey Sachs and Leon Kotlikov, I think it's Columbia. What if machines are getting so smart, thanks to the microprocessor brain, that they no longer need unskilled labor to operate? Paul Krugman from Princeton, Nobel Prize winner, a very well-known New York Times columnist. Can innovation and progress really hurt large number of workers, maybe even workers in general? The truth is that it can. And serious economists have been aware of this possibility for almost 2 centuries. On the other side, you have the neoclassical economists. And they say this is all just pure nonsense. And so Ken Rogoff, since the dawn of the industrial age, a recurrent fear has been that technological change will spawn mass unemployment. Neoclassical economists predicted this would not happen because people will find other jobs, albeit possibly after a long period of painful adjustment. By and large, that prediction has proven to be correct. So the debate in a nutshell is Do we take the last 200 years as a binding precedent or not? The new law that are saying this time it's going to be different. The new classical are saying no, it's not going to be different. So who's right? Well, even economists cannot agree, and definitely I cannot bring new insight as an economist here. But I want to look at it a little bit from the perspective of computer science. So let's go back to basics. So I kind of like to point the beginning of artificial intelligence to William Stanley Jevons in 1869. I mean, you can argue. I mean, there may be even George Bull, but he started very explicitly also writing about the mind. He built this device. This is called the logic piano. This is a machine that does very primitive logical reasoning over 4 logical propositions, but it's all from moving wooden pieces. So William Stanley Jevons already write the machine represents a mind endowed with the power of thought, but wholly devoid of knowledge. So the questions about the relationship between machines and mind, already based on this very primitive machine, people start thinking about how much of thinking can be automated. And this was in the UK. Some years later in the United States, Charles Saunders Peirce, an important American philosopher, again raising the question precisely how much the basis of thinking a machine could possibly be made to perform, and what part of it must be left to the living mind is a question not without considerable practical importance. So all in the 19th century, people are thinking about the limit of artificial intelligence. But probably the person who really thought and wrote on it in the most fundamental way is Alan Turing in a very important 1950 paper, Computer Machinery and Intelligence. And the paper is famous for the imitation game, which also known as a Turing test, also of course by now a movie. And I know that Diane talked about the Turing test. I misheard her lecture a couple of weeks ago. But really, to me, the most important part of the paper is the questions: can you have intelligent machines? I mean, the imitation games only was an attempt to define intelligence. That's a whole other discussion. But Turing offers a compelling analysis why he thinks that yes, that one could build intelligent machines. And he says, I believe that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machine thinking without expecting to be contradicted. So that's probably a bit off, right? We are now 2015 and we don't quite say machines are thinking. But he generally, the bulk of the paper is a philosophical analysis of can you have machine intelligence. And Turing goes and enumerates 9 objections. I'm surprised he didn't manage to find a 10th one, but he only had 9. And I won't go through all of them. I will go to one of them, and against each objection, he refutes every objection that has been raised against the prospect of intelligent machines. And number 6 is what he called the Lovelace objection. And this is also called the originality objection. And he quotes Ada Lovelace, who said in her notes, in her paper, an analytical machine has no pretension whatsoever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. This is very much people think, well, machines only do what we tell them to do. But Turing already knew something that Ada Lovelace did not know, which is, even if somebody gives you a program, trying to predict how this program will behave, that's undecidable. We cannot predict, even given you're given the program, you ask, how will it behave? The answer is, we cannot tell how it will behave. And Turing wrote, machines take me by surprise with great frequency. In fact, anybody who's written programs know that programs do not what we want them to do. Okay? So this is one of the objections that he raises. Now he was an optimist. He thought by the end of the century we will only talk about machine thinking. And he was not the only optimist. When people start doing AI, these are the very early pioneers, they were very, very optimistic. Simon and Newell, 1958. Within 10 years, digital computer will be the world chess champion. This is 1958. Computers are very primitive. They are very, very optimistic. Minsky, within a generation, the problem of creating artificial intelligence will substantially be solved. Well, the AI always suffers from periods of hype and then kind of booms and busts, so to speak. And there are periods that are known as AI winters. What is an AI winter? One is slow progress of the field, but maybe we can sustain slow progress, but much worse than that, very challenging funding environment. And that's unacceptable to academics. So I don't quite remember the first AI winter. I was just starting my academic career here in Hebrew University in 1980. But I distinctly remember there was a huge hype around the Japanese fifth generations, and then it turned out to be a complete bust. And again, there was a period that was very challenging for AI. So many people kind of start dismissing AI to say, oh, it's never there, it never delivers. And then something very important happened in 1997. And Newell and Simon prediction, in a delay of, they said about 10 years, which was in 58, turns out it was about 40 years. But IBM Deep Blue beats Garry Kasparov. The competition was in New York City, and IBM invited me and paid my ticket and my hotel. I couldn't say no to such a generous invitation, so I went to see the game. I'm not generally a huge chess fan, and I thought that watching a chess game that proceeds over a few hours would be like watching the paint dry. But actually, it was very exciting. They managed to make it a very exciting event. The first game was Kasparov was white, and he played incredibly cautiously. And he explained later, after he won the first game, and he came down and talked to us, and he explained that normally when you go to play against someone, when he goes to play against Anand, all the games are public. You can go and read all the game, and you know exactly what kind of style of player you are facing. This one you have no idea. So this was against playing a very strong player who you know nothing about. So he was incredibly cautious. In fact, most of the game, his pieces did not go out of his half of the court, so to speak. Only towards the end, he kind of went on the attack and defeated the Deep Blue. So I watched the first game, and I remember telling myself, well, actually, I believe that one day computers will win, but I guess the time has not come. And so I was convinced by the first game that Kasparov will win the tournament. And even though IBM was paying for me to stay for all the games, 6 games, it's too much. I saw one game, I get the idea, and I cut the visit short and I went back to Houston, which was a colossal mistake, because in the second game, Deep Blue was white, and Deep Blue went just after Kasparov fraud, so to speak, played a very aggressive game, not only won the game, but played so well that Kasparov was crushed psychologically. He had a hard time believing that this is just a machine. He kept saying, no. He thought there was a whole team of programmers somehow behind it, telling Deep Blue what to do. And in fact, interesting, because this was his style, was to be so aggressive to crush his opponents. And that's exactly what happened to him. He never recovered. He lost the tournament. And a very important milestone in AI has been breached. And then, in the decade after that, we see other kind of very important milestones being breached one after the other. In 2005, there was so-called the DARPA Grand Challenge of autonomous driving in the desert, in Death Valley, and Stanford won, going 131 miles in an unrehearsed desert trail. The year before that, in 2004, they had the same challenge, and I don't think any single car was able to do more than 7 miles. But they all learned from that, and the next year they're able to do it. 2 years later, there was the urban challenge, and now CMU had a car that was able to drive 55 miles in urban environment, no accident, no traffic violation. And 2011, again IBM made a major investment in developing a technology to play the game of Jeopardy, which is kind of it's a game show of answering sometimes very clever questions. And Watson was pitted against 2 fantastic players, Brad Rogers and Ken Jennings, and won decisively. Just really crushed them. It was really a shocking thing, because people could see how chess is really just a matter of very deep search in the game tree. Even though this is not, it's a very simplistic version, but answering questions, think of something, what is it? I mean, I'm not an airport in Chicago, named after World War II battle, you really have to kind of put several things together to realize this is Midway Airport. Okay? And so this is what happened in 2011, and then people start taking AI very seriously. And so to see today, I want to show a couple of videos. Let's see if it's going to work. This is a robot called Big Dog. The idea is to have a mechanical mule. This is, of course, for the military. And there are nice things. So what happens if you go and you kick it? It's just like a real animal. It tries to balance itself, and there's fantastic balance. Okay. Now we have the Google car. Car drives itself. This is the Amazon warehouse, huge warehouses, the size of this campus. You still need people to put things in boxes, but bringing the products to the packing station is all mechanized by now. These are robots. You typically think of a robot as something moves like that, but robots don't have to look humanoid at all. So, what are the prospects of intelligent machines? I think the prospects are very good. The progress that we've seen has been perhaps slower than what the pioneers have expected, but nevertheless a fantastic, amazing progress, seems inexorable. We can go back and look at Turing's analysis. Why should there not be intelligent machines? I think his analysis is as fresh, as compelling today as it was in 1950. And in fact, if you take theology or metaphysics aside, I see a whole bunch of intelligent machines here. Okay? So maybe we're not made from silicon, but nevertheless it's possible to build intelligent machines. And in fact, if you just follow the news, you will see every week, you see something in the newspaper about a new type of task or a job that is now being performed by machines. Things that one would not expect to do, all the way from a pharmacy, deboning chicken, guarding prisons, doing sedation, serving drinks at bar, and on and on and on. You see it every day. So this raised a fear that people have been floating around. You can go back to, in some sense, all the way perhaps to the Golem and Frankenstein, kind of the fear of the other, where the other is some kind of machine. And I think this is this picture from the Terminator kind of embodied this. Look at this. How can you not be afraid of such a monster? And so some of the discussion you read now about AI is about existential risk. And so you have Oxford had the Institute for the Future of Humanity, and Cambridge, Center of Study of Existential Risk. So, but I want to talk about here, I want to go back to the much more prosaic topic that I started with, and this is jobs. So in the context of the Great Recession, as the economy was shedding jobs by the millions, people start writing and saying, yes, we have economic recession, but maybe there is a larger thing happening here which has to do with technology. And so Martin Ford, not a well-known, I mean, he's a software entrepreneur, but he wrote a book called Lights in the Tunnel, and I think the metaphor is when you're walking tunnel and you see the light, is it the light of the exit from the tunnel, or is it the truck that's coming towards you? Not so clear always what is the light. And so he wrote, again, maybe what's happening is because of technology, we're losing so many jobs. And that book did not gather much attention. In fact, when it came out, I did not hear about it. But in 2012, Bryn Jolfsson and McAfee, two economists from MIT, so it helps to come from institution with pedigree, and they wrote a book, The Race Against the Machine, and they say explicitly technological progress is accelerating innovation even as it leaves many types of workers behind. And now people start taking it much more seriously. Okay? So we have, and the debate has been going on since roughly 2012, has been, as I said, between the neo-Luddites and the neoclassicals. But the neo-Luddites are not just saying, well, you know, technology will take jobs. They're actually showing, with lots of economic data, that something has gone terribly wrong with the economy over the past few decades. If you think about it, 1980 is also roughly the year that the PC comes about. I think 81 was when IBM PC came about. For example, we all heard about the decline of American manufacturing. Turns out, if you look at manufacturing volume, there's no decline. There's some zigzagging, but you always have zigzagging. This is the Great Recession again. This is volume of manufacturing, but this is employment, manufacturing employment, and you can see it peaked around in the mid-70s, and since then it's been just crushed, laying a hole. I mean, we're talking about millions of people with maybe only high school education that could join the middle class by getting a good manufacturing jobs, and now these people have lost this possibility to find a good job. Again, the United States has been always very famous about being a job creation machine, especially always the US is proud how it does it compared to Europe. And the answer is that indeed, if you look at the early decades, post-World War decade, it is very impressive. But it seems to be slowing down. And if you look in the context of what happened over the previous decade, there was no net job creation. If you take the recession, the Bush recession, and then the two Bush recession, the beginning and the end, there was really no job creation in the 2000s. And we've been hearing a lot, and especially in the last couple of years, since Piketty's book came about, about inequality. Suddenly, topic is on the table in a very, very big way. And again, the data is very, very clear. In any way you look at it, you see growing inequality. You can look at household income, and you can see what happened with the top 1%, top 10%, and the rest. Or share of income, and again, you see a similar picture. You can look at the difference between the mean and the median, and the grower it is. Again, it tells you that you have greater inequality, and you see the difference between the mean and the median is increasing. Turns out that if you are within 1%, this is like a fractal, you see the same picture. So if you are, this is here what we see is the bottom 90%. So this is flat. This is the top 1% is here. But the top 0.1% is here. And the top 0.01%, you can see that you see the same gap within the 1%, you see the same gap between the 99% of the top 1% and the top 1% of the top 1%. Now, this is very interesting because this is what happened if you look globally. This is global, this is not US. And this goes from the lowest income people to the highest income people. And you see that at the bottom half, there's been actually tremendous progress over the world. So we have seen globalization is fantastic for the world at large. And billions of people have been pulled out of poverty. So you see great improvement for the people who are the lower ranks of the economic ladder. And it was very good for the people at the high end. But these are the people at the middle class people in the developed world, and they have not done so well. Now, one argument always you hear in the United States, whenever you say the word inequality, people say, oh, this is class war. What do you care if other people are doing very well? You know, it's not your problem. Let other people enjoy the fruit of their labor. But it turns out that inequality has many adverse effects on the economy as a whole. So data show that you have countries with higher inequality have actually lower economic growth. The economy as a whole grows less when you have more inequality. Again, this is very noisy data. You can see many countries all over the place, but there's a very clear, there is a very unmistaken line of negative correlation between inequality and economic growth. Similarly, people looked at inequality and social mobility. Social mobility is the ability of people to be born in, let's say, one quantile and move to a higher quantile. And again, we see the data shows us that countries that have lower inequality also have higher mobility. I mean, the gap is smaller. It's much easier to move between different strata in the economy when there is more equality, more opportunities. Again, various measures of social well-being. People looked at it, crime, disease, etc., and you see the same phenomenon, that you have higher inequality, you have less social welfare, social well-being. Pretty shocking, this data that came just very, very recently. So generally, when you look at mortality for men between 45 and 54, so usually you think, this is a group that if you have just better healthcare system, you expect that over the years their mortality will decrease. And this is true in almost all developed countries. In the United States, this group of people, these are many of these people who people who had manufacturing jobs, lost their jobs, did not find any other jobs to do it, all kind of things happen, but mortality has been increasing. This just came out, data came out, in effect, I forget, one of the Nobel Prize winners, the Scottish Nobel Prize winner in economics, just there was a paper that came out with this data.
What's the W?
US white. This looks at US white. And again, you look at the economy, you look at the lower, you divide into the lowest third, the middle third, and in terms of this, on the income spectrum, and again, by some measure, the middle class is shrinking. You look at labor share as part of the whole national economy. You look at the whole economy and say what part of it is labor versus capital. And you see it is declining, labor is declining. Labor force participation, which is much more important very often than unemployment. Unemployment only talks about people who are looking for a job. And if they cannot find a job, they consider unemployed. If you stop looking for a job, you're not unemployed anymore. You move to another category. And labor force participation that used to be in the low 80s has been steadily declining now. And again, you'll see lots of zigzags, but there is a very strong strain of decline. One explanation is people look at Social Security disability income. And you see that, very interesting, where it's growing the fastest is people who are in their roughly 45 to 65. So these are people pre-retirement, and the theory is that probably lost their jobs, cannot find other jobs. I mean, if you work for GM, you're not going to become necessarily a Google programmer. And at this point, especially if you're a man, you have some health problem, if you can convince a doctor to sign on your disability claim, then you're now on disability. And there we see a significant increase over the years, and the theory is that many people who should be in the working population, are not working, are using Social Security disability as their long-term unemployment plan. Again, wage versus GDP, and on and on and on. Okay, we can show this data in all kind of ways. Long-term unemployment continues to increase. So the point is there are many, many indicators that show that something is not doing well, especially in the United States. But some of these data is also true globally for the developed world. The developing world is a whole other picture. Okay? But in the developed world, interestingly, the plot that shows the manufacturing volume versus manufacturing employment, if you take the Chinese data, you get something very similar, but with about a 30-year gap. So Chinese manufacturing employment peaked a few years ago, and it's now actually going down. So in 2013, Gartner, very, very solid kind of blue chip economic consulting company, came up with a report, and they say smart machines will have widespread and deep business impact through 2020. So they think this is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
What happens in 2020?
They'll issue a new report. They'll issue a new report. It takes $500 to get this report. They'll tell you a new report in 2020.
The machine will make it.
And they say most business and thought leaders underestimate the potential of smart machines to take over millions of middle-class jobs in the coming decades. So now this is something that you read. This is not it's not limited to a small number of neo-Luddites. I mean, this is very recent. Just in the summer, there was a summit of luxury business summit. Okay, these are the products that none of us, I suspect, ever buys. The Lamborghinis, the watch that cost $20,000, etc. So these people have their own conferences, okay? and here is what Johann Rupert, who is one of these billionaires, says in that summit. He said, how is society going to cope with structural unemployment and the envy, hatred, and the social welfare? Warfare. We are destroying the middle class at this stage. It will affect us. We cannot have 0.1 of 0.1% taking all the spoils. It's unfair and it's not sustainable. I mean, I don't know how much they worry about fairness, but surely they're worried about the backlash from this economic situation. And I mean, again, I'm not an economist, I'm definitely not a labor economist, and when I read about it, people say it's not a simple thing of labor substitution. You can break it into what's called factor-based technological change, where technology makes capital and high-skilled worker more productive, and it makes, in some sense, the low-skilled people, the demand for them is smaller, and the class-based technological change, where the people that now have more money also have more political power. So you have declines of unions, for example, in the United States. Okay, I don't know how much in Israel. At least there's no strike, so I don't know what it says. But the general thing that we can see is decline of labor and the rise of inequality and capital. And now you can see it on the papers. These are just random sample. You go, I get this now. People send to me these headlines almost every week. There are some articles about, will robots steal your jobs? Man versus machine. The robots are winning. The rise of the robot. This is now every week you read an article in the mainstream media about this. And this is last year, 2014. The cover page of The Economist. Economist is a very sober, business-oriented British magazine, and they had a special issue on this topic, the rise of the robots, with this picture of the robots taking care of children, taking care of the elderly, delivering packages. Even you see, if you look at this, there is a robotic dog. That's what dogs do.
Taking a robotic pee.
Yes, on probably a robotic plant.
Yeah.
Now, last year there was a poll. The Pew Charitable Trust did a poll among a group of about 1,000 economists and what they call thought leaders, and there's no agreement about this. I mean, you can see the people are very split. But what's interesting is, I would say, is if you look at between the people who agree or uncertain about the role of technology and automation in the decline of median wages, this is 73%. And the people who disagree or strongly disagree is actually at this point a smaller group. It's quite surprising. So we need to go back to this question, why should it be different this time? After all, technology has been creating jobs now for hundreds of years, and destroying jobs and creating new jobs. What's different this time? And to me, what's different this time is that now we are really, the AI project is about building machines that will be able to compete with us on almost all aspects. If you want, you can say that the older machines competing with us on brawn, on sheer force. And the new machines are trying to compete with us on brain. They're trying to be as smart as we do. Suppose that the project is successful. Suppose that we have people here on this campus who are trying to build smarter machines. It will not happen in 10 years. Maybe it will have, 50 years, 100 years, I don't know. But imagine that we are successful building machines that have the same intelligence as we do. They have physical dexterity and situational awareness that we do. Maybe even the same emotional intelligence that we do. What is then our comparative advantage? Just being made of DNA, proteins. So it's very, C.P. Gray has someone who's written about it, and he has a beautiful parable that I like very much. And in this, you imagine two horses that are having a conversation sometimes in the early 1900s. And I think Model T comes out around 1910 or something like this. So one horse is very concerned about this automobile because it will take away jobs from horses. And the other horse says, come on, technology has been taking jobs from horses now for thousands of years, but new jobs for horses have been created. Not to worry, there will be new jobs for horses that we cannot even think about at this stage. And so this, if you want, this is a debate between the new Luddite horse and the new classical horse. As it happens, the new Luddite horse would have been right. because the horse population peaked around 1915, and especially if you look today in developed country, what are the jobs for horses? It's a pet, mostly. I mean, there are a few exceptions where horses do real work, but by and large, horses exist today because we like them as pets. So, if you take this parable, then the new Luddites would have been right. So, rather than, I said we won't settle the debate, but I want to say, suppose that the new Luddites have a case. Let's try to look into the future. So if machines are capable of doing almost any work that humans can do, what are we going to do? Now, I think that projecting for 100 years to me is utter impossibility. I mean, if you imagine yourself in 1915 trying to project 100 years, I don't think it's feasible. But I think 30 years is a reasonable time to try to project, because all of us have a personal stake in what will happen in 30 years, either because we are still going to be around, or because our children will be around, our grandchildren will be around. So most of us feel very, this is not something, if I ask you, are you worried about the sun going nova in 4 billion years? I suspect that you are not losing sleep over that possibility, okay? But about what will happen in 30 years, yes, we feel this is happening. We have a personal stake in that. Now, it turns out that science fiction writers have been dealing with this question. And in fact, one of the first books that I have found that have dealt with it is Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. And really, the whole book, if you look at the end, is about these questions. When robots can do all the work, what will humans do? And the answer at the end of the book is, we will immigrate and populate other planets. Well, maybe I think this is around 1950. Maybe in 1950 we can imagine that we're going to populate other planets. Today people realize that this was a far-fetched dream. Definitely not in the next 30 years. Maybe we'll get to Mars. Maybe people will get to Mars in the next 30 years. But populating Mars, it's a science fiction dream. Going beyond Mars, not clear at all if humans will ever go beyond Mars. People have underestimated how hard it is in fact to travel in space. I mean, the moon is practically in the neighborhood. I travel every year, just my mileage on United is enough to take me to the moon. The moon is very close. Mars is very far away. Beyond it, it's science fiction. The other answer that people give is that, in 30 years, we and the machines will merge. So this is, some of you are Trekkies, this is Jean-Luc Picard, who is merging with the Borg, so to speak. And to me, this is not a solution, this is a dystopia. I hope it doesn't happen. So the answer that most of the time you hear about this is, wow, actually what's the problem? It's wonderful, we won't have to work. We won't have to go on strike, robots will do all the work. We will have plenty of time for leisure. So I want to spend the rest of the time just thinking together with you on this issue, on the leisure-only life. So of course there is a whole economic issue, which is if you look at our current economy, to assume that you work for a living. And there will have to be a huge adjustment, which will going to be very, very difficult. Think of the debate we're having in the United States now over generation, just over one issue, healthcare. And just imagine trying to rearrange this whole thing of how you make a living, trying to make such a change. What happens if, just imagine this curve that keeps going down of labor force participation. Imagine it's now in the 60%, imagine going down to 50%, perhaps below. Huge implication for society. But let's ignore the economic issue. I want to think about a very old question. The Greek philosophers ask the question, what is the good life? What is the life worth living? What is a meaningful life? And they consider it to be the most fundamental philosophical problem. That's what the philosophy and ethics were really combined at the time. What kind of life should you want to live? And we can think of that. There have been other periods where labor was in some sense superfluous. If you look at some period during the Roman Empire, there were robots that were just called slaves. So the population was, I think like 90% slaves, did all the work. And the free citizens were either the patricians who owned the means of production. And what did other people do? Well, this is where we got panem et circenses, right? This is bread and entertainment, which again I think is a dystopian society. That's how people, today perhaps we won't have lions, we will have maybe TV and video games and virtual reality, but perhaps it's equally dystopian. So it turns out that these questions about life without work was raised by Theodor Herzl. So Theodor Herzl is, I don't know if everybody knows, but he is the founder of modern political Zionism. But he was also a writer. And in 1904, he wrote a play called Solon in Lydia. Now, Solon was an Athenian statesman, and we know that he has written a set of laws for Athens, and he knew they will have a hard time adapting to the laws, so the commitment was that they must follow the laws for 10 years. But he expected this to be difficult, so he wanted to get out of Athens during that time. So he went traveling, and he went to Lydia. Lydia was in Anatolia, and the king was Croesus, very famous, very rich king. Today we say rich as Croesus. So when he comes to Croesus' court, Croesus tells him, look, I need your advice. There's this young inventor called Cosmos, and he figured out a way to make flour without growing wheat. And so we have essentially, we've solved the problem of creating food. There is food. It's cost nothing. And I would like to reward him for this wonderful invention. I'm thinking of giving him my daughter in marriage. What else can I do to thank someone for such a wonderful invention? So Solon says, you should kill him. Croesus says, you're out of your mind. I want to thank him. You're telling me to kill him? Get out of here. This is a stupid advice. Of course, I'm abbreviating this tremendously. And so what happens later? The Cosmos is asked to deploy his invention. He starts making flowers out of air somehow. And so people don't need to go to work. And it's not a good thing. They get bored. They become lazy. They become restless. They become quarrelsome. They start getting upset about these things, and they start talking about rebelling against the king. They start blaming the king for everything that is not good now in their life. And in the final scene of the play, they're meeting again in the palace, and there are riots in the street. And there is a meeting between Croesus and Solon and Cosmos. And Solon tells Cosmos, well, you're still of the opinion you can make the people happy? You hear the commotion down there? Do you want them still to have bread without worry, without work? Empty this drinking bowl. He gave him a chalice of poison wine. And he said, drink it. Because it's not enough that we destroy your invention now. We have to destroy the knowledge of it. Because people will get it out of you. Drink it for the welfare of mankind. And Cosmos drinks the wine. And that's the end of the play. Okay. So this was Herzl basically saying, life without work is life without meaning. So I think that for academic, there are really very fundamental, very deep research questions, which is, as I said, the economic picture is still cloudy. People argue what has been causing this divergence we see in the economy. Some people say because of technology, other people blame globalization, other people blame other type of political forces. So this is still a debate about this. Is there anything we can do about this? And we change somehow tax policy, educational policy. What should we do to try to reverse this trend? And if we think that this is unstoppable, okay, how should we start thinking about society that goes into this workless era? There is a huge public policy challenge here. Brynjolfsson and McAfee, again, said there is no economic law that says that everyone, or even most people, automatically benefit from technological progress. How to make sure that the fruits of the progress are distributed more evenly? It's a huge policy challenge. In a very nice report that came out last year by Richard Merman and Frank Levy from Harvard called Dancing with Robots, they put it as the central domestic policy challenge of the 21st century. How to ensure middle-class prosperity and individual success in an era of ever-intensifying globalization and technological upheaval. The number one, the central domestic policy challenge. So I think there is a question, at least for the people here who are computer scientists, to me there is a huge question of what is our social responsibility. So going back to Ada Lovelace's question, yes, many of us are doing this because we have to make a living, we have a family to support, we are enjoying, we want to be rich and famous, we are enjoying this job. But what are we doing for the benefit of mankind? So if you look at Turing is very excited about the technological challenge. For him, it's a fantastic research problem. We may hope that machine will eventually compete with man in all purely intellectual fields. We can see plenty there needs to be done. So for him, it's an exciting challenge, how to build intelligent machinery. There's not a trace of any doubt in his mind about, wait a minute, is it worthwhile? What would be the consequence of this? So, I mean, there is an example of it. If you look at I would say, the thing that drove the Industrial Revolution was the discovery of cheap energy. Really, the thing that have changed our life. If you go back 300 years ago in our life today, the thing that has changed the most dramatic way at the end is cheap energy, carbon-based energy. And now we are facing the consequence of this in terms of climate change. And the reality is we are addicted to cheap energy. It's going to be very, very difficult. You know, now we had Paris, yet another agreement. We will see. I'm not very optimistic in the short term that we are really going to be able to stop our reliance on carbon-based energy. So, what should we do now about this picture? About this emerging picture of perhaps of workless future? What's our social responsibility as computer scientists? And most computer scientists have a very hard time dealing with these questions. For them, they're computer scientists. Their job is to figure out the technology, and the philosopher, the economist, all these other people, they'll figure out the social aspect of it. I want to finish with really, I kind of thinking about this, kind of maybe by going to beautiful story, beautiful parable, okay? And this is the Garden of Eden. So, just to remind you all what happened, God creates Adam and Eve, and he puts them in the Garden of Eden. And he says, go have fun. Except there is just, you can eat whatever you want, there's just one tree that you should not eat. So they go around, they're naked, they're frolicking in the garden, probably lots of sex. You know, it's a good time. I mean, if you think about it, they're like monkeys in the forest, right? They're hopping about, jumping between the trees, creating fruits. Life is good. And then the darn snake, serpent, goes into the picture and starts with this famous thing. He says, no, God is lying to you. You can eat the fruit. So she eats the fruit, and then Adam eats the fruit. And then they start seeing, they're naked. Then God comes to the picture, and he is not a happy God. Okay? He's pretty pissed off. And he curses them. To the woman he says, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrows I shall bring forth children. So this is the curse to women. And what is the curse on men? Curse is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of your life. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. בזיעת אפיך תאכל לחם. So, what is this story? To me, people, you know, much of the story of Genesis, people trying to look at the world around them and try to make sense of it. So, for example, how come everybody's talking different language? What's going on here? Why cannot people talk my language? So there is a Tower of Babel. How come all these animals are not having to work so hard? We have to work so hard. These are farmers already. Agricultural revolution happened. Why are we working so hard? We are the only ones seem to be working so hard. So there is an explanation. It's a curse by God. But in this contest between humanity and God, humanity seems to be having the last word. Why? Because we ate from the tree of knowledge. So it took us about maybe 10,000 years or maybe 100,000 years, but we discovered hunting, tools, hunting, agriculture, industrial revolutions, machines, and now we are about to eliminate work. The curse, remember the curse. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. Well, how many people here sweat for work? Unless you're running after the bus or something like that, okay? It just sweat does not happen. Most of us have to go make a special effort to sweat. Okay? It doesn't happen in a natural way.
You have to go to the gym.
Go to the gym to sweat, right? Not for work. In fact, we can talk about epidural, even the curse for women, we seem to overcome it. So eating from the fruit of knowledge was a very smart move, because we're able to counteract God's curse, right? But now, can we go back to Eden? Can we do it? Going back to Eden, frolicking naked in the Garden of Eden, is this a viable option for us? Nigel Cameron, will a world without war be heaven or hell? Now is the time to think about it. Thank you very much.
We've got time until 12:30, and then we'll reconvene after lunch at 1:15 for further questions. So I'll open the floor. I'll let you choose the questions.
I'm a bit skeptical about the original data. How much a crisis is there? It is U.S.-centric, but in the global economy, maybe it's wrong to consider U.S. separately. You mentioned that while jobs went down in U.S., they went up in China. Eventually, they went down in China, but they're going up in Vietnam and some other countries. So globally, the global picture may look somewhat different.
So the picture that happens in the US is somewhat similar to what's happening in the developing world, but it's more stark because, for example, look at Europe, there is kind of more of a social welfare way to even out many things. And the question is, can the US somehow try to deal with the same issues that you have in Europe have been able to deal with it. If you look at what happened in the developing world, then industrialization, globalization has taken had a huge effect. But what you see is, for example, you see the same kind of thing in China, is that why labor declining? The reason that labor declining because it's basically just arbitrage between the how much you have to pay laborers and how much you pay for let's say for industrial robot. So the cost of machines continue to decline.
Or how much you pay to Vietnamese.
And how much you pay them. If you look what happened the issue in China, labor costs go up. So yes, you're right. You can see what happened in Vietnam, but they will face the same issues, which is wages are going to increase, and the cost of machinery is going to decrease. So it's hard to argue there is something very different. You know, the question is how much,
How long it'll take.
How long it's going to take going to Africa and how fast, what is the pace. For example, right now we're seeing that industrial robots, the price is declining very, very fast. And the deployment is many things that before they were just too expensive to do. But it's becoming, more and more feasible to start build a factory from the beginning, just with robots. You can see there are now pictures of huge factories with no people in them. Just the whole thing has been automated. So it's not, yes, I mean, there is a period, the question is, will it unfold? How long would it unfold? The other thing that I have to say, let's suppose that this is true for the developing world, okay? Well, that's still, we're talking about the developing world, I don't know, it's about 1.5 billion people. What are they going to do? Okay, so even if it's not true for the whole world, I think the trends are maybe just simply different in other parts of the world in terms of time span. But if the new models are right, then the picture is global. It's not going to be different in another country. Unless, I said, there will be, for example, some people advocate technology curtailment. We should stop technology, which I think that never has been proven to be successful.
If I may. There is another issue which is natural for me to ask, is coming from Soviet Union. There is a certain correlation between decline and more socialism. So Europe is much more socialistic. Obama's policies were market hostile to some extent, and the decline in Obama's years, you called it Bush recession. I think it's Obama's recession, Obama's poor recovery. So the only clever mechanism we know how to distribute goods is market. So in a sense, there are two sides. One thing, whether because of socialistic deviations, we don't use market properly. The second thing is, you may be right, the problem is we don't have any other good distribution of goods outside of market.
So, I'm a radical pragmatist. That's how, if you ask me to classify myself, I would say I'm a radical pragmatist. As you recall, when the Soviet Union collapsed, people says, well, this is true because they were not true communists. If they just practiced true communism, somehow this would have been successful. And when capitalism almost collapsed in 2008, people said, oh, it's because we have not have been true capitalists. If we just had been true capitalists, then it would not have been happened. And to me, I look at both positions and as kind of unserious positions. And the reality is that what we do now, even there are no pure socialists, there are no pure market-oriented. It's all a mixture, and it's about just moving things on the spectrum. Okay. I mean, so this is going to be an internal debate exactly where the needle should be. On how to distribute it, in fact, there is an interesting proposal that used to be a conservative proposal. And this is called BIG, Basic Income Guarantee. And the idea is that every person, just by feature of being a citizen, get a check from the state. And I mean, this happened, for example, in a very conservative state in the United States, Alaska. Everybody gets a check because the oil, they get a lot of oil royalties, and everybody gets a check. Not enough really to live on. I think it's like $5,000 a year. But suppose it would be not $5,000 a year, but maybe $25,000 a year. So it turned out that this proposal came from people like Milton Friedman and Murray, the sociologist, the guy from the bell curve, Charles Murray. Murray. And their conservative argument against it, because they hate the power of the state to decide who gets money, who doesn't get money. So they like this proposal because it does away with huge part of the social welfare part of the state. You know, so all the way from social security and healthcare and everything is just to say, well, we'll just give you a check, you figure out what to do with it. So this proposal is apparently now it's discussed a lot. I think that I would just imagine what it took to pass healthcare, imagine what it would take in a country like the United States to make such a significant socioeconomic change. It's going to be incredibly difficult, I think, partly because of these sentiments. I mean, people are not willing to change the picture very easily.
Yeah. I want to raise a super AI issue that I have discussed already with you privately, and that has to do with the languages of science. So we mathematicians consider mathematics as being the classical language of science. And in view of the successes of math in describing the physical, narrow physical world, that sounds convincing. However, my doubts go back to Wigner. He wrote an article called "The Unreasonable Success of Mathematics in Science." And he points out that actually classical science, the gravity, atomic physics, chemistry, certain parts of chemistry, quantum mechanics, actually deal with a very small number of variables. And the relation between these variables can be set down by simple, relatively simple mathematical rules. Consequently, the success. But if you consider a system like the economy, there are so many factors in the economy, some of which were mentioned here, that has to do with labor, machinery, capital, wish of people to buy, to purchase, and so on, that there are arguments, and eventually, unlike physics, there are these differences of opinions. Some people say we are on the curve up in development, others say we are on the curve down or whatever. Similarly in biology, our brain, but not only our brain, our whole body is so complicated. There are so many factors affecting our health, our behavior, what have you, that a simple mathematical description has not yet been successful. So now the question is, do we need, that's my question, do we need a new language to discuss these very complicated systems to describe, predict, understand. There is an example of another language, namely music. So music enables us to express, to feel emotions. No mathematics, no mathematical theory does that. Now the age of computers. Are we proceeding towards an era where, for example, there is going to be a computerized model of the economy which will absorb economic facts of the past 50 years, ups and downs and what have you, correlate them in a way and produce predictions in a way which is completely not even understood by us. I mean a step way beyond the chess-playing machine, which in a way we do understand. Somebody is going to program a computer, introduce a lot of data about, let's say, our body, our mind, or what have you, and then the computer is going to proceed doing a computation which we really don't understand, a simulation, and produce results, very useful and correct results, which are as of now beyond the reach of classical science, mainly as expressed by the limited, very limited language of mathematics.
So
I raise this question.
It's a very good question. And there is
What's happened in my field is
Yeah, deep learning.
Deep learning. No one can understand what happens. You just give
So
them
you
out
build
data.
deep learning. You build. I mean, it's really an old idea of neural nets, but what has changed, and people have raised it. I think went back to the 60s, I believe, even before that. I mean, you go back to Pitts and McCullough in the 40s if you want. But what happened over the years is that now we have more powerful computers, so we can deal with much more complicated network, and we have a lot of data, tremendous amount of data to train this network, and we have a lot of money that's being invested in this technology. And so today, if you go, for example, to a conference such machine vision, it's been completely transformed by this, because exactly you build models, no one understands anymore. It's not like it's a model where I say we will discover edges and contours and shades. None of that. You have millions of variables, and in some sense you let the computer build a very, very complex model that you don't understand, and you just check how well does it perform. And the answer is it's performed. I mean, it's still people are debating, but I would say is that in many areas of AI, it's completely changed. The picture from today and 10 years ago is completely different. And there are many areas where we already have reached, like face recognition, I think we already have reached essentially human level performance. Okay, I think that for years we tried to do it based on, let's understand the principle by which you recognize a face. And now people say, forget about the principles. Just build a huge model, millions of variables, train it, and yeah. Can we apply to other areas of science? I think it's a fantastic question. The economy clearly was way too complicated for us to understand. Even our economy is saying that the nice mathematical models do not capture the complexity of the economy. Can you try to build a model that will do economic predictions better? I think
So
it's a very, very
maybe
good question.
let me add a remark. Computerized models, let's call them models, and behavior of a computer, like you say, in some areas we already have success. I'm also putting on the table the question of different languages, whether computerized or not, in the same sense that music is different as an emotional language, is different from the other languages we are familiar with, English, Hebrew, French, Chinese. So there are many philosophers here. I understand it's mainly a gathering of philosophers and philosophers of science. So I put it as a challenge. Can one think of a formulation? And even better, can someone invent a language which, with or without computers, is going to be a more precise, more ideal tool to talk about economics, like the limited number of variables and differential equations, or maybe partial differential equations, or statistical methods which are nowadays being used. And economics would be just one example. And I predict that in different fields you are going to have different languages. So it's not going to be one new language, like we now have Hebrew, English, and mathematics. It's going to be a whole variety of completely new, as of now, unpredictable languages. Thank you.
You had a question, Gil?
Yeah, you were soliciting comments from economists.
Please.
I'm not sure I'm the type of economist you had in mind, but still.
Any economist is better than economists and what I know in economics.
Okay, so let me offer this comment.
Yeah.
You had all these time series, which were remarkably in agreement with one another. If you had put on another time series, namely monopoly power, you would have seen that monopoly power has greatly increased over exactly the periods that you were referring to, due to many things. Some are technological in origin, in the sense that, for example, bandwidth is a natural monopoly producing item, but the others are political. Deregulation has been rampant in the same period that you pointed out. So maybe the whole issue is one of power, of politics, of monopoly, and of regulating these aspects of our lives, and that could change the picture, since what the basic tool that you were using was two graphs. If they run the same way, they're probably correlated. Well, we know the limits of that, but I offer another graph that's also very highly correlated, which is power, and in particular monopoly power in the economies of the world. Globalization is another source of
Thatcher-Reagan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we should take that into account and see what that produces for us. Thank you.
No, that's why I said. That's why, I mean, we cannot run really, it's very difficult to run experiments. And I mean, if you look, Piketty, in fact, has another explanation, which is not technology, right? He claimed that the previous, the 30 years after World War II was an aberration, because there was so much destruction of capital in some sense, and the power of capital. And he claimed that what's happening now, that's the normal. And it's the period between World War II and 1980, which was, he called it an aberration.
If you want to go into that, we go, but there it's the, somehow the gains to capital are greater than the going rate of interest. That's his basic inequality that runs the whole thing, and it's controversial, and you know. And
so one issue, does correlation mean causation?
So
Not always.
I think there is a big argument about it, and I think the answer is we really don't know. We really don't know. And the answer is, as I said, talking about the future, it's always a prediction. But let's suppose that all I think we have to say about this is, it does not look as, you know, some years ago you could have said, if I said the same position in 1980, it was really hard to take it seriously, because people said, look, the history is always on the side of technology at the end benefits people. But now I think there is a serious doubt on that question. The other thing I think I want to say, and that requires a whole other lecture, is people say, look, the Industrial Revolution happened and everything was fine. And I think, to me, this is incredibly simplistic and naive compression of incredibly violent history. I mean, I look at what happened because of the Industrial Revolution. If you just take that, you said that the Russian and Chinese revolutions are outcome of the Industrial Revolution, bang, you have about 100 million people died across these two revolutions. If you read now these books by Timothy Snyder, I mean, you realize that the bloodletting was unbelievable, and we have yet to hear what happened in China. So to say, oh, well, we have adapted, it took us about, if you look at, it took about 200 years. The emergence, in some sense, the social welfare state is a response to the Industrial Revolution. And it really became only fully fleshed out after World War II. So you could say it took about 200 years to adapt to the Industrial Revolution, to the world in which we live today. Now, if you take the prospect that we will see in the next 50 years changes that are going to be on the same scale of Industrial Revolution, you start to think what kind of social change will be needed just to somehow cope with this, with whatever change is coming our way. Okay, time for lunch.